Guys, welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our macOS development with AppKit tutorial series. And in this particular tutorial we are going to be covering the fundamentals of another framework for building applications in Swift called SwiftUI. Now, why are we covering the fundamentals of SwiftUI when this is a macOS development series using AppKit, a completely different framework? Well, the reason why we need to cover some of the fundamentals of how SwiftUI works is because there are many things that you can use from within AppKit to integrate SwiftUI code into your AppKit applications. For example, you can embed SwiftUI views in your AppKit apps using NS Hosting Controller and NS Hosting View. You can embed SwiftUI views in your menus, to construct your menus in your toolbars and your pull-down buttons and all that sort of stuff using SwiftUI views. Using the NS Hosting menu that was introduced this year at WWDC. You can use SwiftUI animations in your AppKit apps. All kinds of stuff you can do in AppKit using SwiftUI code. So it is important that you at least understand the fundamentals of how SwiftUI works so you can interact with these features if need be, like in a code base that you are working on with someone else or something like that. So, let's start by talking about what is SwiftUI. Well, SwiftUI is another framework that Apple has created primarily for building multi-platform apps. Now, the way that SwiftUI does things is slightly different than how AppKit does it. AppKit takes a traditional imperative approach and uses, MVC. It uses reference types for everything instead of value types and all that. It's the traditional way of building apps for Apple platforms, in this case, macOS. However, SwiftUI takes a different approach. While much of SwiftUI under the hood is still obfuscated AppKit code or UIKit code, or whatever it might be, depending on what platform you're running your code on, the code you actually write takes a more declarative approach. So you literally declare what you want to be shown on the screen. SwiftUI takes that, interprets it, converts it to AppKit, UIKit, whatever code behind the scenes, if there's no native solution for it under the hood, and it'll display it to you. You don't have to do any of the constraints or anything like that. You have to specify what you want to show, the size of things, stuff like that, but the constraints, like all the translates auto-resizing mask into constraints and NSLab constraint.activate and all that stuff, you don't have to do that anymore. Now, managing state also changes, but in most cases, you're not going to be managing state within your SwiftUI views when interacting with an AppKit app. So that isn't as important here. But you should know that SwiftUI is a much different programming paradigm than AppKit. So, now that we know kind of what SwiftUI is, what are some of the things that we should know about SwiftUI and how we build views with it to make our transition here a little bit easier? Well, the first thing is the view protocol. So the view protocol is the building block for all views in SwiftUI. If we go down to the bottom of the view protocol's documentation, and we see, let's see here. If we go and look at the inherited by section, you can see a long, comprehensive list of all the SwiftUI views that conform to Vue, which is almost all of them. Right? So, having Vue is very important. Now, Vue has one specific requirement that you must implement in order to conform to the protocol, and that is a computed property called body. Now, this will be written out as var body with a return type of sum view. Yes, sum, using the keyword sum view, and then we open that up with curly braces. Now, that syntax might seem odd to you, and that's fine, because that's relatively new stuff, and the feature that it uses is pretty complex. Paul Hudson actually has a very good article on the topic over on Hacking with Swift. Pretty much what this is it's called an opaque return type. And Paul goes much more in depth into opaque return types in this article. This isn't a video solely about opaque return types, so I'm not going to go too deeply into it. But what you need to understand about opaque return types is that this allows us to tell Swift we want to return some kind of thing that conforms to this specific protocol, but I don't want to tell you what that thing is. I want you to figure it out for yourself. This is important in SwiftUI because if we were to tell SwiftUI the exact return type of our views, it would be extraordinarily long, right? It would be at least 6, 7, maybe 8 lines, if not more long, depending on how big your views are. So we just tell it we want the body to return some kind of view, and you, Swift, behind the scenes, interpret that and figure it out for yourself. Return whatever it is that you determine with your type safety, type checking system. All right, so that is pretty much opaque return types in a nutshell. It's a very complex topic, and I wouldn't be covering it here in sort of an introductory sort of video or in a series of videos for someone simply just learning, especially if you're not familiar with SwiftUI at all. But it is important because in SwiftUI it's used extensively. You do need to know that it exists, and on a basic bare bones level, what exactly it does, right? That it just tells Swift, hey, I want you to return some kind of view, but I want you to figure out the exact type yourself, so I don't have to do it. All right. Now, if you want to learn more about SwiftUI, I have a series going on at this very moment alongside my UI Kit series and this series for SwiftUI. In the very beginning videos, first maybe 5 or so videos, maybe even the first 3, something like that, they also can serve as a way to get you started in SwiftUI. But don't go through that series and this series at the same time, because I don't want to confuse you, right? You shouldn't want to confuse yourself either. So what I recommend is learn the fundamentals, learn how views work, stuff like that. Maybe learn some of the basic views like buttons and text and stuff like that. Don't go too far into the weeds. Just a couple views like menu, maybe, or definitely text and buttons. So you kind of have a general idea of what you're dealing with, and then come back here, finish this series, and then if you feel so inclined, continue on with SwiftUI and learn SwiftUI. I would have the same advice for someone using UIKit. If they're just learning UIKit and don't know anything about SwiftUI, because in UIKit you can also use SwiftUI views in your hierarchies. Learn the fundamentals of SwiftUI once you get around to it, once you're at a point where you think you're ready. Learn those fundamentals. Go back to the UIKit series, finish that, then SwiftUI if you feel so inclined to complete that. All right, so that's kind of what I would recommend you do in this case. Finish this series with knowledge of the SwiftUI fundamentals, and then come back, and then once you're done with AppKit, learn SwiftUI because it is where things are going. So, with that being said, that pretty much does it for this video on sort of some of the fundamentals of SwiftUI that you're going to need. But one thing I guess also I should mention before I go is that, remember how I mentioned AppKit uses reference types instead of value types? Well, SwiftUI uses structs. It uses value types. And that's because everything has to be lightweight, has to be fast. You have to be able to, put stuff on the memory stack and then take it off pretty quickly and effectively. So structs are the perfect way to do that. All right. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.